You know, every single year, thousands of CSS aspirants sit down to pick their optional subjects, and a surprisingly large number of them just land on criminology completely blind, without really knowing what they're actually signing up for. It's kind of treated like a magic quick fix to easily fill out those 600 optional marks. Maybe you heard it overlapped nicely with sociology, or hey, maybe the syllabus just looks really short on paper. But listen, choosing a subject just because the syllabus looks short is a huge trap. It simply isn't enough to secure a top score. You need a solid strategy. So in this explainer, we're going to build a clear, actionable roadmap to completely demystify this 100-mark paper. By the end of this, you're going to know exactly what is demanded of you, section by section. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our blueprint for today. We'll be covering why criminology, Section 1 on theory, Section 2 on justice systems, Section 3 covering investigation, Section 4 on contemporary crime, and we'll wrap up with the 10-year trends.
Starting with Part 1, Why Criminology, the FPSC's Purpose. So before we even look at the syllabus, we have to ask, why does the FPSC even test this stuff? Well, because as a future civil servant, understanding the crossroads of sociology, law, and public policy is a genuine, real-world necessity. Whether you end up in the police service, the administration, or really any group dealing with law and order, you'll be making decisions that directly touch on crime prevention and justice. And to pass this test, you've absolutely got to respect the exam structure. As you'll see, the 100 marks are split perfectly into 4 equal quarters, 25 marks each. This proves the FPSC demands breadth across the entire syllabus, rather than just going deep in one single area. I mean, a candidate who masters theoretical concepts but completely ignores investigative procedures is going to struggle, for sure. You have to conquer all 4 slices of this pie. Let's move to Section 1. Conceptual and theoretical foundation. Now, this is exactly where weak answers start to fall apart. Candidates love to just jump straight into complex arguments, but mastering the underlying theory and basic concepts is literally the backbone of the entire exam. So, what actually is criminology? Simply put, it's the study of crime, criminal behavior, and the systems that society builds to respond to both. The absolutely crucial paradigm shift here is framing crime as a social problem, not just a simple legal violation. It's all about answering the why before we ever look at the how. And to really understand that why, you have to be totally comfortable distinguishing between related but very distinct ideas: deviance, sin, vice, and evil. For example, lying might be a sin, and gambling might be a vice, but they aren't always crimes, right? Deviance is just breaking a social norm. It's like wearing a neon suit to a funeral. It's weird, definitely, but it's not illegal. You really have to know the exact conceptual boundaries of these words before you can intelligently discuss criminality in your essays. Which leads us right to the theoretical core. Yes, you'll need to understand biological and psychological theories, but you absolutely must master the 5 major sociological schools. For instance, understanding how strain theory explains crime as a result of severe economic pressure, or how labeling theory shows that officially calling someone a criminal can actually become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Bringing those in will give your essays incredible depth. Oh, and on top of these Western theories, remember that the FPSC explicitly expects you to prepare the Islamic perspective on deviance and crime, backed up with specific scholarly references. These definitions and theories are your rock-solid foundation, because almost every other section is going to ask you to apply these exact concepts to modern problems. All right, let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds: juvenile justice and the criminal justice system. Now we're shifting from abstract theory to tangible institutions. This is where theory hits reality. A massive chunk of this section focuses on juvenile delinquency. You need to be able to clearly contrast a behavioral definition of delinquency with a legal definition. You also really need to understand the concept of a status offender. This refers to a minor who commits an act that wouldn't even be a crime if they were an adult, things skipping school or running away from home. Pair that with a solid grasp of how official statistics on juvenile delinquency are actually collected, and you'll be on very solid ground. Next up, you need to walk through the actual dynamic journey of the juvenile justice system. Picture a minor entering the system. First, pretrial, like what exactly are the legal boundaries for a police officer making that arrest? Then, the trial. How do the roles of the juvenile judge, the prosecutor, and the defense interact differently than they would in an adult court? And finally, sentencing. What is the exact role of the probation officer in making sure that youth doesn't end up right back in the system? Honestly, understanding these distinct roles is non-negotiable. And once you understand the system itself, you have to critically analyze its outcomes. And this brilliantly illustrates a favorite area for essay questions. Candidates are frequently asked to weigh punitive treatment, so things like imprisonment or corporal punishment, against reformative treatment, like rehabilitation and probation.
The examiner wants to see if you can argue both sides with hard evidence, rather than just blindly asserting one viewpoint. Moving right along to Section 3, Investigation, Technique, and International Bodies.
Okay, I want to give you a quick warning here. Aspirants constantly underprepare for this section because, let's face it, it feels highly technical and a bit dry, but ignoring it means literally throwing away 25 marks. You need to know the actual techniques, everything from manual intelligence gathering to database, electronic, and forensic investigation. Do you know the exact legal and psychological difference between a standard interview and a hostile interrogation? Well, you're going to need to. Investigators don't operate in a vacuum, right? All of these techniques are strictly bounded by legal and ethical rules, like the specific procedures for stop and frisk, making an arrest, and search and seizure. This section closes out with international criminal justice organizations. We're talking UNIFE, Interpol, Europol, UNODC, UNICEF, and the IPA. Please do not leave this for the last week of your prep. Transnational crime is a huge favorite for examiners, and knowing which organizations fight global trafficking and money laundering is absolutely essential. Just treat this as a quick recall list. Make sure you memorize what each acronym stands for and what their primary function is.
Okay, Section 4, Contemporary Criminology and the Pakistan Context.
We've reached the final quarter. This section is where the syllabus connects directly to Pakistani's current affairs and the news you read every single day. Now, the list of topics here is pretty overwhelming, so let's instantly provide some strategic clarity by grouping them into 4 manageable buckets. First, security threats. That includes things like terrorism and radicalism. Second, policing evolution, which covers modern law enforcement, intelligence-led policing, and media representation. Third, social dimensions, exploring gender, urbanization, and white-collar crime. And fourth, human rights, focusing on protections for children, women, and minorities, alongside the role of civil society. Categorizing your notes like this will honestly save you hours of confusion. Now, within that massive list, you absolutely must prioritize these high-yield topics: money laundering, cybercrime, and the roles of key Pakistani institutions like NAB, the FIA, and the ANF. But here is the absolute secret to scoring high on this section. Don't just write a standard current affairs essay. Taking a modern issue, like a massive money laundering case, and analyzing it through the lens of the sociological theories you learned back in Section 1, that is exactly what separates an average answer from an examiner's absolute favorite. It proves you aren't just reciting the news, you're actually applying criminology. And finally, Part 5, 10-year exam trends from 2016 to 2025. So we've covered the syllabus roadmap, but to give you a true advantage, we need to look at historical data. Now, what's really interesting about this is when you analyze a decade of past papers, exactly 5 topics stand out as the absolute most repeated high-frequency questions. And here are those 5 golden topics. First, the definition and scope of criminology. Second, the behavioral versus legal definition of juvenile delinquency. Third, money laundering. Fun fact, money laundering alone has appeared 6 times in the last 10 years. Honestly, you'd think the examiners are running a cartel. Fourth, the principles of criminal investigation. And fifth, the role of the police within the criminal justice system. If you're building your first study plan, these 5 definitely deserve your early mastery to build a really strong foundation. But let me be explicitly clear, do not ignore the dormant topics. The FPSC will definitely catch you off guard if you only study these 5, but they are absolutely the best place to start. And that brings us to the end of our roadmap. A top score in criminology really requires seamlessly blending abstract theory, institutional knowledge, procedural rules, and current affairs into cohesive analytical answers. It is a compact syllabus, sure, but it demands serious strategic focus. So looking back at those 4 sections we just broke down, which section of the criminology syllabus do you find most intimidating? Identifying your biggest hurdle right now is the very first step to jumping over it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and happy studying.